Welcome to this special edition of SPE Live, Mentoring and Sponsoring Keys to Success. In this special program, we wanted to address what are some of the factors for successfully progressing your career. In this case, the role of and importance of mentoring and sponsoring. These soft skills are important for any graduate student and young professional within the energy industry, and in fact, any chosen career path. The inspiration behind this series comes from Maria Angela Capello and Yves Sprunt. Maria Angela is a chair of the SPE Business Management and Leadership Committee. She is also a renowned thought leader in the energy sector, expert in reservoir management, talent development, and diversity and inclusion. Yves Sprunt, a renowned thought leader and author, 35-year veteran of big corporate oil and gas with Mobil and Chevron, and 2006 SPE president. Understanding the need behind successful mentoring and sponsoring, Maria Angela and Yves brought together an eclectic, diverse group of expert voices from as far afield as executive coaching, the arts, academia, the petroleum industry, and big tech. We have divided the content into three parts to give you best accessibility to the voices of our expert guests. First, the effectiveness of having a sponsor. Here we talk with Elizabeth Coffey, founder of Spark Leadership, Sue Webb, Associate Professor, Geophysics, University of the Witwatersrand, and Maria Guinand, Artistic Director, Schola Cantorum Foundation of Venezuela. We talk with them about the need for a sponsor, someone who is in a position of leadership or has influence or power that can open opportunities for you and who will support you as a good candidate for desirable positions. In the second episode, Finding a Sponsor and Engaging, we talk with Alvaro Celis, VP Worldwide Devices and Consumer Channel Sales at Microsoft, Kamal Ben Nasser, Namadia Energy Consulting and 2022 SPE President, and Tom Blasingame, 2021 SPE President and Professor of Petroleum Engineering at Texas A&M. We talk with them about their insights on how to find and engage potential sponsors and the art of mentoring and sponsoring individuals. The third and final episode, Asking the Right Questions, we talk with Ulrika Volonsky, Chief Operating Officer, World Petroleum Council, and Luis Pacheco, Fellow at the Baker Institute Center for Energy Studies. These two leaders in the energy industry explore with us the appropriate questions to ask mentors and potential sponsors and the impact of different cultural settings. In summary, this special program, we address some of the factors for successfully progressing your career through mentoring and sponsoring. We've been very lucky to bring together a very rich and diverse group of expert voices. We talk about the importance of being present, being genuine, adaptable, self-motivated, building your networks, and asking for advice. We'll hear some very inspirational and thought-provoking insights from our experts. So please enjoy. Thank you. The effectiveness of having a sponsor. To quickly and smoothly climb a corporate ladder, more than a mentor is required. You need a sponsor who is in a position of leadership or has influence or power that could open opportunities for you and who will support you as a good candidate for desirable positions. The challenge is you can't directly approach someone who you don't know very well and ask them if they will sponsor you. You must earn their trust. This SPE Live explores different aspects and experiences of sponsoring from the perspectives of some very diverse and renowned leaders in executive coaching, choir conduction, and in academia. We are joined today by Elizabeth Coffey, Sue Webb, Maria Guinand, Yves Sprunt, and Maria Angela Capello. Welcome to SPE Live on this episode here. Great to have you with us all today. So I'm going to kick us off very quickly here. So Liz, you are renowned as an executive coach. Do gender differences affect the process of sponsoring and mentoring?
The answer is no and yes. So in 2 ways, no, and in 3 ways, yes. The ways in which they're not affected is in terms of the actual process and the content of what people discuss. So in those ways, they're just the same. The differences are really in 3 areas. The first is that women and men often have different styles of management and leadership that they bring to bear, and that changes the dynamic. As part of that, they also have different assumptions that they bring to these processes. And the third way in which there's a yes is the perception of others about these relationships. So if I can just go and tell you two stories which are illustrative. One is actually from the mentoring side. I worked with a woman who was one of the most senior people in one of the oil majors in London. And she was being mentored in an early program by the CEO of one of the top FMCG companies. And she moved into a very senior role on the executive committee. And he said to her, the first thing you need to do is fire somebody publicly. And she was a very genteel personality, a very feminine leader. And this was anathema to her. She had a team that looked really strong to her and didn't seem like it actually required anybody to be let go. But he was making the point to her that she needed to establish an atmosphere of fear so that people feared her. And this was completely opposite to how she thought about leadership. So there was this very interesting kind of clash between the styles of him and her, him as the mentor, her as the mentee. So it's kind of illustrative of that kind of difference that I'm talking about. If I look at the kind of sponsoring issues, one of the most interesting things about that, there's one aspect of that is that men's and women's assumptions about finding a sponsor are often different. So men have grown up with the social life of playing with boys as they were young, and then socializing with men as they grew older, and have the assumption that you need sponsors. And so they look for sponsors and they foster relationships that could become sponsorship relationships for themselves. Women often do not have that thought in their heads. They don't have a background for, if they've been socializing with other females through most of their lives, that's something that they need to do. It doesn't naturally necessarily occur to women that they need to look for this or foster those kinds of relationships. The second thing is that if you are, historically, senior men would identify a high potential male who was junior to them to sponsor, and would talk in positive tones, often in informal, but sometimes informal conversations with other senior leaders about that individual and help advocate for advancement for that individual in one way or another. I had a very senior man from the insurance industry talk to me about how he would never sponsor a female who was a junior to him because he was fearful of how it would look to others, particularly other senior men, in terms of, he said, I'm a married man. If I'm seen meeting with this individual, it might look bad. It might give the wrong impression. It might be misconstrued as something other than what it is. So he wouldn't go near it. This is, I think, even more extreme in Middle Eastern nations or other cultures where there's a lot of gender segregation, where you have to be quite careful about how you meet with members of the opposite sex for business purposes. I know of one person in a big oil producing culture who is a very senior woman in this organization who told me she could only do influencing on her own during work hours. Her husband would meet with other senior men in the evenings 3 times a week, and if she needed other stuff done, she actually had to work through him. So to this point about trust, there was high trust between those two, and the sponsorship relationship was very natural, of course, between a husband and wife. But it was very indicative to me of how limited her scope was.
Oh, thanks, Liz. Thank you very much. So some really important points there you made about the influence of gender. As in your experience, there's a big difference between men and women, and maybe there's even negative perceptions and connotations around men sponsoring women or high potential women. So let's get back to that gender question a little later. I'm going to just turn to you, Maria, now. Maestra in the music world, so a very, very different world to the corporate world of Liz. In your experience, why is having a sponsor essential within the music world?
In my experience, it was essential having a sponsor because when I finished my studies early in the 70s, and I decided to come back to Venezuela, everything was to be created in the new ideas of choral conducting and orchestral conducting for young people and for social development. So at that time, there were two men who were really the leaders in that respect, Alberto Grau and José Antonio Abreu. And they created space for, not only for me, but for many other women and young men to develop. So I think that in general, in the music world, to have a sponsorship is essential for you to find the right path where you can develop yourself, where you can create, and where you can invent new ideas for developing your own career. In my experience, personal, my sponsors were not only men who trusted me, but they were very, they wanted to fight, they wanted to create, they wanted us to be really very adventurous people. And they influenced me personally also, not only artistically. I can remember moments when Alberto Grau just threw me in front of a choir and said, okay, you have 3 hours to conduct today this choir. And I was like in shock, or do I have enough to say to them in these next 3 hours? And then I could find and dig in all the knowledge. Or when José Antonio Abreu will say, Maria, in the next, in 2 weeks, I want you to conduct Mozart's Requiem with a huge choir of 400 voices and the orchestra. And it was perhaps my first experience to do that. So there were moments of great emotion and challenge in my life. And I think that was really important in fostering my strength and my giving me really secure me and let me know that I could do it. And I think this is essential for young people to receive that from their mentors.
Oh, thank you, Maria. That's really interesting and quite sort of different to what Liz was talking about. You obviously have a very different experience of mentoring and sponsoring, and maybe, again, we can talk about that shortly. Maybe it's that difference between the corporate and the artistic spheres. So very interesting. Just going to turn to you now, Sue. You emigrated from North America, forged a successful academic career in South Africa, a very different culture to North America. What cultural aspects did you need to take into consideration in finding a sponsor in South Africa?
Well, it's interesting because I had sponsors both in North America for some of the activities I was doing there. For example, being on the board of the AGU and SEG and things like that. But then I also needed sponsorships in South Africa, and the culture is so different and so diverse. So it's almost, I think the term is called code switching, where you're behaving slightly different. And the culture here is very polite and based on trust and individual relationships. So you have to develop personal relationships with everyone. And the idea is it's a little bit less competitive. So, you know, it's more about the group dynamic and the holistic benefits as opposed to the individual succeeding or focusing on the individual. So locally, I was able to develop some very good sponsors that were incredibly helpful to my early research career, that provided funding and you know, provided opportunities, but it seemed always very different from what I was doing in North America, where it was very competitive. And when I would go to conferences in North America, I had to think a little bit differently about how I was interacting with people. So I think it's very important to be aware, if you're traveling and working internationally, to be aware of cultural differences and expectations, and take the time to really speak to people and understand some of these differences. And to learn to be kind and kind to yourself too when you make mistakes. You know, you can't beat yourself up for a long time. You have to move on and say, okay, well, I didn't do that well. Well, let's try this again. So it's very interesting to see. For example, in South Africa, there's 11 different languages. Now, I don't speak them, but it's interesting to be aware of how many different languages there are. So I think those would be some of the aspects I'm interested in.
So again, very interesting, again, a very different perspective. You're talking about the group dynamic versus a sort of competitive individual and how that grows up from sort of cultural differences. So very interesting there. I need to turn to you, Maria Angela and Eve. You're both the inspiration for this SPE Live series on mentoring and sponsoring. What are your reflections on what Sue and Liz and Maria have said about the essentialness of sponsorship, given gender and cultural differences? Maria, perhaps we'll start with you.
All right. Well, I would like to say that even if we explore the different realms of the corporate world, music, academia, there is a common thread in that, which is the need of guidance, but also the opportunity that the sponsor opens for the young professional or even experienced professional at certain points in the career. We can see that is common in academia, in the corporate world, and in music. I am marveled to think of the empowerment the sponsor can bring to a career. And I wish that I knew that before in my own. And this is why I think that it's good that the SPE shares this kind of webinars and visions, because one needs to look for a sponsor and a mentor early, very early in the career, to accelerate the speed of progress and perhaps to open the opportunity of success earlier. I think that is very important. And that is my take on what I hear. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Maria Angela. Eve, do you want to step in here and give us your thoughts?
Yes, I think this is tremendously important for young people. I know that because I was one of the most naive in that I had the idea that you could succeed just on how good you were. And fortunately for me, I had sponsors and mentors who reached out to me long before I realized that they were fulfilling that role. And I've realized over time how important it is to be much more proactive than I ever was. So I think that the importance of this topic is for people to realize that that being technically superb and very competent is not sufficient. No one can ignore the soft side and the importance of human nature and those interactions in terms of how people get ahead. And it wasn't until I became aware and started being more proactive that I could shape my destiny better. And I think one of the fun things about this conversation is, since we're all so very different and in such different parts of the world, it really emphasizes the universality of human nature and these processes. So, Maestra, you went from conducting within Venezuela to international assignments. How does sponsorship in music work in the international setting?
Well, I love to hear what you said before, the soft side. And I was really taken into the international world through the soft side, because I married Alberto Grau, my husband, and we became part of international organizations. And I got to know very well Roy Salzman, who was the president of the International Federation for Choral Music. And then he connected me to the international world. And one day he invited me to be part of the conducting class of the Oregon Bach Festival with the renowned maestro Helmut Rilling. And that was back in the late 80s. And I was sitting in that class. In Venezuela already I had a position, but not internationally. And I was sitting in that class, and I suddenly realized it wasn't enough to be good or to know your music well enough. You needed to show more. And I was really avid. I wanted the knowledge that Maestro Rilling was giving us in that class. I wanted that to come to Venezuela and to be given to all our youngsters, through the movement of the Schola Cantorum and the youth orchestras. So I dared to approach him and say, Maestro, do you want to come to Venezuela, and can we create there a Baja Academy so that you give us all your knowledge? I will promise I will find the money and the possibilities. And I didn't know even if I could do that. And that opened up a huge world for me after that. Because in my international career, Maestro Helmut Rilling became really my main mentor and sponsor. So I think the fact that I dare not only to work for myself, but to work for others and to say, I want this knowledge that I see outside in the world to be part of the knowledge that the people in my country will have. That really created a beautiful scope in my life. And I was able then really to have many roads open in the world of the international music making as a choral conductor and also as a symphonic orchestral, choral symphonic orchestral conductor.
Wow, Maestra, that is amazing. And it's a fabulous story because it tells us about the power of the sponsor, the right sponsor. I wonder how many sponsors do you need in your career? And let me ask Liz. Liz, do you have any comments about how many sponsors do you need in your career?
I have heard from a very senior man who is an advisor to a top CEO in the energy sector, that 7 is the answer to that question. And I'm very much echoing what Sue was talking about, because it's necessary to have multiple sponsors who are in different circles at different levels in the senior decision-making population to be advocating when you're not in the room on your behalf, for your career, for your advancement, for you getting budget for your projects, for you getting promoted and given salary increases and bonuses and so on. And I know a number of women who I've worked with over the years have come to me in despair because they had one sponsor. They had a sponsor who was their boss or maybe the CEO of the company who absolutely loved them, thought they were fantastic, and helped their career during a certain point. And then that person retired or moved to another company. Now what? If they haven't actually developed those other relationships, then they're kind of out in the cold. And this has happened to innumerable women that I've actually worked with and helped to repair that. It's a constant thing that I have to kind of go round back with women and say, how many do you have? Think about this. And they'll maybe say, oh, 1, 2, maybe 3. It's very few women who actually say to me above 7. I did have one about 6 months ago who said she had 14. I was like, yes. But it's crucially important, absolutely crucially important.
Liz?
Yes.
I think that your point highlights to me some of the importance of professional societies, because one of the things is, you need mentors beyond your own organization because you never know what's going to happen. Life is very uncertain. And I have found over the course of my career that some of my most critical mentors and sponsors have been people I've met through professional societies, and in particular, SPE. So one of those things was, coming in not as a petroleum engineer originally, it was my boss who said, you must join this. And that was perhaps the best mentorship he ever did for me. And then subsequently, I know I had multiple mentors and sponsors within SPE, and it ended up shaping my life. And so this, I think, is a good segue because each professional discipline is a world unto itself with different cultures and different aspects. So we're always dealing with multiple cultures, whether it's corporate culture, country culture, professional society culture, discipline culture. So Sue, In your
Yeah.
experiences in South Africa, what role does gender play in securing a sponsor?
Well, certainly when I first arrived, I was not only, you know, a foreigner coming into a new country, but I was also often the only woman in the room. So it was very difficult at first, and I want, you know, the one thing I really appreciate about being in South Africa is how much things have changed here over such a relatively short period of time. I mean, I've been in the country for 30 years. And it's just changed absolutely dramatically. You know, from open harassment and, you know, stuff that you didn't see maybe back in the 50s in the States, but, you know, it's completely changed now. So I think it's important to keep up with how things are changing and to trust that they will change. You know, believe in the change and make it happen is very important. So you know, gender played a big role, I think, in the very beginning when I first arrived. And, you know, it was very difficult to break into the kind of old boys club in the mining industry. But it changed very rapidly. You know, once I became an academic and got into that field, it changed quite a bit. So it's interesting to see how rapidly things change, and being part of that change has been really, really exciting. So it's yeah, I think change, and over time, and now I'm a mentor and a sponsor. And that's a role I didn't expect to play. You know, I didn't understand how important it was. I think some of the things Liz was saying about it really resonate with me, about how you become the sponsor and the mentor to younger people.
That's amazing. I'm in awe of all of you for just your diverse experience and viewpoints. Fascinating to hear you all speak about this. So, you know, you mentioned now sort of gender, the struggle of gender, differences in culture, rapid changes in some spheres, maybe not in others. So thinking about gender and culture, is sponsorship and mentoring, is that part of this glass ceiling that we hear so much about that prevents a lot of women from progressing in their careers? Is that a cultural thing? Is it a gender thing? What is that? Maybe we start with you, Liz, and then we go around the table here. What message do you want to give to the audience?
Yes, I would say it definitely is part of the glass ceiling situation. And I think if I think about this, what I would say is that the most critical element of whether a glass ceiling exists or does not is held by the most senior decision makers in the organization. That may be the chief executive, it may be the chairman, it may be the you know, the body of the senior leader group, whatever that looks like, executive team. But whoever those people are, those are the people who actually either enforce the glass ceiling, consciously or otherwise, or break it. And what I would say is that there are two elements to that. One is it's affected by the leadership culture, and let's bear in mind that basically in any kind of male-dominated industry, the history has been such that the cultures of an organization have been created by men on the basis of male assumptions about what good leadership looks like.
Yeah.
And this is really important and subtle and a kind of invisible difference, which is why the glass part of it, it's a transparent but invisible thing that's there, because men's assumptions about what good leadership look like often do not 100% align with what women think about this. And if you think about somebody like Jacinta Ardern versus a Bolsonaro as kind of almost examples of feminine or very masculine leadership styles, one doesn't look like, you know, Jacinta doesn't look like a leader in a very male-dominated culture. But she, in fact, is. It's just a different set of assumptions that she's bringing to this, but equally effective. Some might say more so in certain situations. The other thing I would say is that there is a piece which is, again, going back to that group of the most senior leaders. How genuinely committed are they to having diverse voices and perspectives around the leadership table. If there's really a mandate for that to happen, it's absolutely incredible what can be done in a short period of time to break the glass ceiling. And if there really isn't, if there's being lip service being paid to it, it can go on and on and on.
Susan, can you tell us about your own views on the glass ceiling?
Yeah, it's very interesting being in a culture that, you know, we actually arrived here while apartheid was still active. And in 1994, the country became a new country. And so watching this change take place, and it's not just a glass ceiling for women, but for Blacks in this culture. And so it's really fascinating what Liz has just said about the senior team really sets the agenda and sets the transformation. And I agree with that 100%. The changes I've seen certainly in our department, it has to be intentional about the change, and it has to be intentional at every single level. And so I'm very intentional about promoting, you know, students and gender issues and race issues, and it makes a difference. You know, I'm not even a South African, but I feel like we can make progress here. And so it's very important to be intentional about it on all levels, from the very, you know, from first year students, letting people know they belong, and that not just they belong, but they can become leaders in this field. So it's pervasive throughout, and being very active about what you do. But if the top says no, you can only make progress to a certain level. And getting through that, and that's one reason I think it's very important to change the top leadership over time. You need something new over time.
Thank you.
Well, I think in the arts, the situation is a little bit different. Because if it's true that until the 1950s, let's say orchestras, choirs, art management was mainly a male-dominated scene, the talent of women, I mean, the artistic capacity today of so many instrumentalists, so many choral conductors, and perhaps to a later date, orchestral conductors, is really coming up in a very, you know, in a very big proportion, and also in the arts management. You know, the CEOs and leaders of theaters, of orchestras, or of major cultural projects in the world. So I think in the last 60, 70 years, women have really broken that glass ceiling in the arts. And I feel myself that in my career and in my life, I never saw it. I mean, my main mentors were men, and they were always trusting my work and just give me impulse to go ahead and to work along with them.
I'd like to chime in that I sort of feel like I've been pushing against the glass ceiling my entire life, in that at the point I came into the oil industry in the late 70s, there were all kinds of concerns, you know, about whether it was having a woman in the field, a woman traveling internationally. And again, I really felt that SPE took the leadership, because at a time when I was told you couldn't have a younger woman supervising an older man, which stops you right there. SPE, a very senior person within my company, Mobile, Aziz O'Day, who's a Palestinian, unbeknownst to me, put me forward to be nominated as a director at large for SPE. And at that time, that was one of the few positions where the nominating committee had full control. And so they decided very actively that they wanted a woman on the board. And they were congratulating themselves that the sections would not do that. But a year later, Deanne Craig was nominated and joined me on the board as the representative from her section. So sometimes just anyone taking a step and showing that you can break the glass ceiling in various ways can open it up and label it for many other people to say, this is okay. And I'm absolutely thrilled that, at least for my career, SPE took the leadership every time. And so multiple phases where people would say, women can't do this. SPE leadership stepped forward and showed that they could.
One aspect that I would like to add is that many times you don't recognize the empowerment that provides just the willingness to sponsor others. I, for example, have found myself in a position to open doors for Latin Americans in the professional societies leadership roles, as well as for the Middle Eastern people. And I was not given a particularly powerful position, but I have influential leadership. And I would like to encourage all the people listening to us that even if you don't think you have the formal position as a manager or the CEO or perhaps president of a company, you can still influence the life of others and accelerate their careers by opening doors, showing options, which I consider is very important, and provide self-empowerment so that they step in and they feel in themselves the encouragement to move upwards or to nominate themselves, propose themselves for leadership roles. I think that I have done that several times, and it's a way to pay back the opportunities we have received. I would like to ask Liz if she agrees that many times influential leadership is as important as a given formal leadership.
It certainly is. I mean, I think that a lot of research that has been done about how to make change in societies demonstrates that it's actually committed groups of ordinary citizens that, who are passionate about something that do influence it. And also, to go to Sue's point, that often takes time, and a lot of time sometimes. So you want to try to get advocacy as well at the top, because it can speed things up very dramatically. So absolutely, to your point, everybody can make a difference and should be doing these kinds of things that you're talking about, Maria. And also, I think, understand that getting the senior people engaged in these conversations, trying to sort of influence people who are in positions of power and bigger influence than you have, is part of what you can also be doing.
Thank you, everybody. It's been fascinating hearing and very thought-provoking hearing all your experiences and views on mentoring and sponsoring. Especially about the gender and cultural diversities, how that impacts this whole piece of finding a mentor and even providing sponsorship and mentoring others. So very, very interesting, and some really powerful messages and learning to the audience. So thank you very much for sharing all your experiences and thoughts for today. It's been really, really good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.